Dr. Ben Walker had treated everything from aggressive dogs to panicked zoo animals, but when the towering insectoid alien ushered him into a sterile examination chamber, he knew this was something else entirely. "You are the human veterinarian," the alien, Commander Xyloth, stated. Its mandibles clicked together in a rhythm that made Ben think of a giant cicada. "You were the only specialist available." Ben adjusted his bag and tried not to let his nerves show. "I'm a vet, yeah? But I usually work with animals from Earth." Xyloth's iridescent eyes narrowed. "You claim to understand predators, the apex of your planet. That is sufficient," it gestured to a reinforced enclosure in the corner. "Fix it." Ben stepped closer. Inside the cage, something large and dark lay sprawled across a metal platform, its breathing ragged. It was feline in shape if you ignored the extra set of limbs and the spine tail that curled weakly against its side. Its fur, sleek and black, shimmered under the overhead lights. He could see the rise and fall of its ribs, too sharp beneath its skin. "What is it?" Ben asked. "A Korthian Stalker," Xyloth said. "The dominant predator of the Korth system. Unmatched in speed, strength, and intelligence among non-sapient species, there was something close to reverence in its voice. It was injured during a skirmish. Our medics cannot stabilize it." Ben crouched, observing the creature. It had the unmistakable posture of a sick cat, legs tucked in, ears slightly back, tail limp. He exhaled. "It's just a bigger Housecat," he muttered. Xyloth bristled. "It is a perfected hunter." Ben ignored the offense and reached for his gloves. "I'll need a closer look." The enclosure hissed open, and Ben stepped inside cautiously. The stalker's eyes cracked open deep violet, pupils narrowing into slits. A low growl rumbled through its chest, weak but unmistakable. "That's okay, big guy," Ben murmured, keeping his movements slow. "I'm not here to make things worse." He scanned the body, noting the way its side heaved unevenly. A wound on its flank oozed dark blood, the edges raw and inflamed. That was bad enough, but the way its muscles twitched involuntarily suggested something deeper: an infection, maybe even organ damage. He pulled out his scanner, an old but reliable piece of vet tech, and ran it over the wound. The readout flashed with red warnings. The stalker had internal bleeding. If they didn't act fast, it wouldn't make it through the next few hours. Ben turned to Xyloth. "It needs surgery, now." Xyloth hesitated. "The creature does not tolerate restraint." Ben gave a humorless chuckle. "Neither do housecats, but we make it work." Xyloth's mandibles twitched in what might have been unease. "Our medical bays are not designed for this." Ben adjusted his bag. "Then clear a space. I'll do it myself." Xyloth stared at him for a long moment before giving a sharp command in its own language. A group of smaller insectoid aliens rushed to prepare an operating space. Ben rolled up his sleeves. He had saved dying tigers. He had stitched up wolves. He could do this. He just had to hope the galaxy's deadliest predator wouldn't wake up in the middle of it. Ben scrubbed in as best he could, given the strange setup. The alien medical bay was pristine, but not designed for hands with 5 fingers. He had to adapt, securing his tools in a way that wouldn't send them clattering to the floor mid-operation. The surgical table, hastily cleared and reinforced, barely accommodated the stalker's bulk. Xyloth stood nearby, watching with an intensity that made Ben's skin prickle. "You are certain you can perform this procedure?" Ben snapped on a pair of gloves. "Certain? No. But this thing is dying, and if we wait any longer, there won't be a choice." He glanced at the alien medic's smaller, more delicate versions of Xyloth, who had brought him a tray of sterilized instruments. Their tools were sharp, ridged, and clearly designed for exoskeletons, not soft tissue. He carefully set them aside and pulled out his own scalpel. The stalker's breathing was uneven. He checked the vitals on his scanner. Not good. The sedatives the aliens had administered earlier were keeping it under, but it was on the edge. If it crashed during the procedure, there was no guarantee he could bring it back. "All right," Ben muttered. "Let's hope this thing doesn't have alien blood pressure tricks I don't know about." He made the first incision. The stalker didn't react, not visibly, at least. Its muscles twitched, but that was expected. He peeled back layers of fur and muscle, exposing the internal damage. The wound was worse than he thought. A puncture had torn through muscle and grazed something vital. Blood pooled sluggishly, its color a deep, almost iridescent blue. Ben worked quickly, using clamps to stem the bleeding. His hands were steady, but he could feel the weight of Xyloth's gaze. "You seem." Unconcerned, Xyloth observed. Ben didn't look up. "I'm very concerned. I just don't have time to freeze up about it." Xyloth's mandibles clicked. "You are under extreme pressure. This creature could kill you with a single movement." "Yeah, well," Ben said, carefully suturing a torn blood vessel. "So could a sedated tiger. Doesn't mean I let my hands shake." Xyloth was silent at that. The procedure stretched on, each moment tense. Ben worked with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this before, if not with this exact species. The anatomy was strange but followed enough familiar principles for him to make educated decisions. He sealed the internal wounds, reinforced the damaged tissue with bioadhesive, and ensured the bleeding had stopped before closing the outer incision. As he secured the final suture, he let out a breath and stepped back. The stalker's breathing remained labored but steady. A good sign for now. Xyloth tilted its head. "It will survive." Ben peeled off his gloves, exhaustion settling into his bones. "I think so. But it needs rest, fluids, and time." He looked pointedly at the alien medics. "Whatever sedative you gave it before, keep the dose light. If it wakes up too suddenly, it might tear the stitches." Xyloth gave a sharp command, and the medics moved quickly to stabilize the stalker on the table. Ben wiped a hand down his face. "That was probably the most stressful thing I've done in years." Xyloth studied him. "And yet you did not hesitate." Ben exhaled. "Hesitation gets patients killed." There was a pause before Xyloth said, almost grudgingly, "Your skill is unexpected." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Because I'm human." Xyloth's mandibles twitched. "Because you treat creatures that could destroy you without a second thought, and yet you do not flinch." Ben looked back at the stalker. Even unconscious, it radiated a kind of lethal elegance. He thought about the lions and wolves he had treated, the animals that could rip a person apart if they wanted to but trusted, for a moment, that he wouldn't hurt them. "It's not about fear," Ben said finally. "It's about responsibility. It didn't ask to be hurt. I was the only one who could help, so I did." Xyloth regarded him for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it inclined its head. Perhaps it said, "You are not as fragile as you seem." Ben huffed a tired laugh. "I'll take that as a compliment." Behind him, the stalker let out a low, steady breath, the first sign of real stability. For now, at least it would live. Ben barely had time to clean up before the stalker started stirring. It wasn't fully conscious, not yet, but the minute twitch of its ears and the slow, deliberate flex of its claws made his stomach tighten. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, scrubbing a hand down his face. He'd just finished a high-risk surgery on an alien apex predator. Most creatures needed hours, if not days, before they so much as fluttered an eyelid. Xyloth loomed beside him, watching the creature with an unreadable expression. Its resilience is unmatched. It does not linger in weakness. Ben exhaled through his nose. "That's great for survival, not so great for post-op recovery." He turned to the insectoid medics. "Do you have any pain management that won't knock it out completely? Something mild but strong enough that it won't try to move too much." One of the medics, a smaller, delicate-looking alien with iridescent plating, hesitated before responding in a chittering dialect. Xyloth translated. "Our standard analgesics are metabolized too quickly in its system. We can attempt a lower dose of our sedatives, but if we miscalculate, it may fully rouse or suffer complications." Ben pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose, thinking. The last thing he wanted was for the stalker to wake up in an unfamiliar environment, injured and in pain. That was a recipe for panic, and panic in a predator like this would end badly for everyone involved. "All right," he said. "We'll try the lower dose, but keep restraints and calming measures ready in case it reacts badly." The medics prepared the injection while Ben kept his eyes on the stalker. Its breathing remained steady, but its tail gave the occasional twitch, subtle but unmistakable signs that it was becoming aware of its surroundings. The moment the medication entered its system, the tension in its muscles eased. Not unconscious, but sedated enough that it wouldn't lunge at the first movement. A good sign. Ben let out a breath, then turned to Shiloth. Now that it's stable, I need to know something. What exactly happened to it? Xyloth's mandibles clicked in thought before responding. It was injured during an engagement with hostile forces. We retrieved it from the battlefield, but by the time it was transported back to our vessel, its condition had worsened beyond our medic's ability to treat. Ben frowned. Battlefield? You're saying this thing was actively fighting? Xyloth's head tilted slightly. It is not merely a wild creature. It is bonded to our forces. Ben blinked. You're telling me this thing is domesticated? Xyloth gave a slow nod. Domesticated is not the word we would use. It is a partner, a warrior trained alongside our own. Ben stared at the massive, still form of the stalker. He had assumed it was a captured specimen, maybe even a research subject. But this? The idea of something so lethal working in tandem with an alien military force was unsettling. You trained something like this, Ben asked, still trying to wrap his head around it. We do not train it as you would an earth creature, Xyloth said. We form a bond of purpose. It hunts with us, fights with us. It understands the enemy. Ben glanced at the stalker's sleek, muscled form. Even unconscious, it radiated pure, refined danger. If it was intelligent enough to work alongside soldiers, then it wasn't just an animal. It was something more. He exhaled. Well, that explains why you were so desperate to save it. Xyloth's gaze didn't waver. It has fought beside us for many cycles. We do not discard our own. Ben felt a flicker of respect at that. He knew plenty of people who treated working animals as expendable useful until they weren't. But here was an alien species that saw this creature as a true comrade, worth saving at any cost. His own exhaustion was catching up to him, but he pushed past it. All right, the surgery went fine, but recovery is going to take time. It needs rest, controlled movement, and proper nutrition. You can't just throw it back into battle. Xyloth regarded him for a long moment. You speak as if you have authority over this matter. Ben crossed his arms. You pulled me in because your medics couldn't handle it. That makes me the closest thing to an expert you've got. Another pause. Then, to his surprise, Xyloth inclined its head slightly. Very well. What are your instructions? Ben resisted the urge to collapse into the nearest chair. First, we monitor it. If it shows signs of distress or infection, I need to know immediately. Second, it needs a controlled environment somewhere quiet, low stress. Third, food and water, but nothing too heavy right away. Xyloth relayed the orders, and the medics moved with practiced efficiency. Ben let out a slow breath, and if it wakes up confused and tries to maul someone, I'll figure that out when we get there. Xyloth's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. You are reckless, human? Ben huffed a tired laugh. Yeah, seems to be a pattern. The stalker let out a low, rumbling exhale, its tail curling slightly. It wasn't out of danger yet, but for now, it was alive. And that was enough. Ben barely had time to sit before a sharp chittering noise drew his attention back to the medical bay. The stalker's breathing had shifted, still steady, but deeper now, more controlled. The kind of breathing that signaled something was on the edge of wakefulness. Xyloth noticed it too. It regains awareness. Ben stood and rubbed a hand over his face. He needed coffee. Or sleep, preferably both, but neither was an option. All right, he muttered. We need to make sure it doesn't panic. The medics were already moving, adjusting containment protocols, dimming the overhead lights. Smart. Less stimulation meant less chance of an immediate fight or flight response. Ben stepped closer, watching the stalker's muscles shift beneath its dark fur. Its ears twitched, its claws flexed, testing. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, its violet eyes cracked open. For a long moment, it didn't move beyond that, just breathing, just watching. Its gaze flicked around the unfamiliar space, taking in the sterile walls, the alien figures. It exhaled in a low, vibrating sound that wasn't quite a growl, but wasn't far from one either. Ben held up his hands, not a submissive gesture, exactly, but one meant to show he wasn't a threat. Easy, he murmured. You're safe. The stalker's pupils narrowed, focusing. It was looking at him now, truly seeing him. Xyloth spoke in a measured tone. It does not recognize you. Ben didn't react outwardly, but he felt the weight of that statement settle in his gut. Of course it didn't. He wasn't part of its world. He wasn't one of its handlers, wasn't someone it had fought beside. To it, he was just another unfamiliar being in a place it didn't know. But it wasn't lashing out, not yet. That meant there was still a window to keep it calm. Ben crouched slightly, making himself smaller without looking weak. You were hurt, he said, keeping his voice steady. I stitched you up. If you try to move too fast, you'll tear everything open again. The stalker's breathing remained steady, but its ears flicked, muscles tensing like it was debating whether or not to test its own limits. Ben exhaled slowly and reached into his bag. He'd brought a few emergency rations with him, standard protein supplements for Earth animals, nothing fancy. He unwrapped one carefully, making sure his movements were deliberate but not threatening, then placed it within reach. The stalker's nostrils flared. Food, Ben said simply. You don't have to eat it, but it's there. The stalker didn't move immediately, but its gaze flicked between him and the offering. It was thinking, processing. Xyloth watched the exchange with an unreadable expression. You offer it sustenance as a peace gesture. Ben didn't take his eyes off the stalker. Predators don't waste energy attacking something that isn't a threat if they don't have to. If it eats, it means it's not in fight mode. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slow and precise, the stalker extended a clawed limb and pulled the ration closer. Ben let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Xyloth's mandibles clicked. It accepts. Ben nodded. That's a start. The stalker lowered its head, sniffing at the food before taking a slow, deliberate bite. It didn't break eye contact with Ben as it chewed. Testing him. He stayed perfectly still. Not challenging, not retreating. Just steady. When the stalker finally swallowed and relaxed slightly, Ben glanced at Xyloth. It's still in recovery, but this is a good sign. Xyloth's head tilted. You are strange, human. Ben huffed a tired laugh. Yeah, I get that a lot. The stalker let out a slow, rumbling exhale, then, to Ben's surprise, closed its eyes again, not unconscious, just resting. Trusting. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Ben remained still as the stalker settled, its body shifting slightly as it adjusted to its new position. The tension that had coiled in his shoulders slowly eased. It was still weak, still recovering, but it had made a choice, a small one, but a choice nonetheless. It had decided, for now, that he wasn't worth the effort of hostility. Xyloth observed the scene in silence before speaking. It acknowledges you. Ben exhaled. Yeah, looks like it. The alien commander studied him with that same unreadable intensity. This was not guaranteed. Ben huffed a tired laugh. Nothing ever is. The medical attendants moved efficiently in the background, monitoring the stalker's vitals, adjusting the containment field to ensure stability. Ben rolled his shoulders, exhaustion pressing in at the edges of his awareness, but he wasn't done yet. He turned to Xyloth. What happens now? Xyloth's mandibles clicked in thought before it responded. It will remain under observation. Once it is strong enough, it will return to its unit. Ben frowned. You're expecting it to go back into combat. Xyloth's gaze didn't waver. It is a warrior. That is its role. Ben glanced at the stalker. The idea of sending it back into battle so soon after a near-fatal injury didn't sit right with him. It still needs time. You can't rush recovery, no matter how tough it is. Xyloth regarded him for a long moment. You speak as if you have authority over this matter. Ben crossed his arms. I'm the one who kept it alive. That makes me the closest thing to an expert you've got right now. A pause. Then, to his mild surprise, Xyloth gave a slow nod. Your argument is sound. It will remain under care until it is fully restored. Ben relaxed slightly. Good. The The stalker exhaled in its sleep, its tail curling slightly a natural movement, not one of distress. A good sign. Xyloth observed this before speaking again. You do not fear it. Ben considered the question. I respect it. There's a difference. Xyloth's mandibles twitched in what might have been approval. The next few days passed in a cycle of careful monitoring and gradual improvement. The stalker's strength returned in increments, its movements becoming more fluid, its breathing steadier. It remained wary but never aggressive, watching Ben with those sharp violet eyes whenever he checked on it. Xyloth observed the interactions with quiet interest. You have gained its recognition. Ben adjusted the scanner in his hands. I think it just realizes I'm not going to hurt it. Xyloth tilted its head. That is not a small thing. Ben glanced at the stalker. It had begun to groom itself in instinctive behavior, but also a sign of comfort. It was healing. When the day finally came for it to leave the medical bay, Ben stood by as the containment field was deactivated. The stalker stretched, testing its muscles, before stepping forward with the sleek, deliberate movements of a predator back in control of its own body. It paused in front of him, head slightly lowered, eyes locked onto his. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, it flicked its tail, a gesture that felt almost like an acknowledgement. Ben didn't need a translator to understand it. Xyloth's mandibles twitched. It remembers. Ben exhaled. Good. With that, the stalker turned and padded toward the exit, muscles fluid, posture strong. It was ready. Ben watched as it disappeared down the corridor, then turned back to Xyloth. Take care of it. Xyloth inclined its head. We do not discard our own. Ben nodded, exhaustion settling in, but beneath it, something quiet or satisfaction. He had done what he could, and for now, that was enough.